Good evening, Gills fans. Welcome back to the latest episode of Gills in the Blood TV. You might be wondering why I've chosen this shirt this evening. Not a shirt worn when we were by any means successful as a football club. The mid-2000s, we were struggling, very low-key, mid-table obscurity at best in League One. But 14 years ago today represents the last time that a man who was anything but low-key in terms of Gillingham Football Club pulled on the famous blue of Gillingham for one final time. I'm talking about Andy Hessenthaler, club legend, former player, former captain, former player manager, former gaffer, former director of footballer. A man synonymous throughout the last 20 years or more with the football club. And yeah, as I say, 14 years ago today represents his final time wearing the Gillingham blue. His testimonial was at the Priestfield Stadium and we took on West Ham and lost the game 2-1. Andy Crofts scoring our goal. So I thought it was only right, especially with the fact that there's not any real football stuff to talk about at the moment in terms of pre-season or friendlies, because we're not back in yet. That'd be a chat for another day. So I thought it'd be a great time to have a look back over the career of Mr Gillingham, as so many call him, and that is Andy Hessenthaler. We go all the way back to August the 7th, 1996. And at the age of 30, Gillingham paid £235,000 for the services of Andy Hessenthaler. From Watford, he'd come into the game really late as a professional, was a hod carrier and playing semi-professional football until he took the plunge. And to this day, I think it's the best £235,000 that our chairman Paul Scally's ever spent, to be quite honest. And we've had some brilliant players down the years, and we spent £500,000 on Carlos Saba. We spent £600,000 on a certain Robert Taylor. We spent £250,000 on Adi Akinbaye. Further on, we spent £125,000 on Simeon Jackson. All massive players for us for various reasons. But for me, the £235,000 spent on Hesse, as he was affectionately known and still is, was an absolute steal. Helped us consolidate in his first season with us in 96-97. We finished 12th in League One, or the old Division 2 as it was back then, having endured a tricky start to that campaign. Our first year back in the third tier, having won promotion the season before. And it became clear very early on what Andy Hessenthaler was all about. He'd run all day. He'd grab games by the scruff of the neck. He'd grab opposition players by the scruff of the neck if he felt the need to, and I'm sure he wasn't averse to grabbing his own teammates by the scruff of the neck if he didn't think they were pulling their weight. But yeah, a really good addition, added bite to a midfield. Was probably first part of Tony Pulis's first rebuild after getting in the players that ultimately won us promotion in 95-96 out of the old Division 3. I think they came in to do a job for 12-18 months, and Pulis knew then he was going to have to rebuild and phase them out and bring in different types of players, younger players. If you remember Dave Martin, probably the closest we had at the time to an Andy Hessenthaler type, but he was mid-30s, but he'd done a great job as captain for 12 months. Hesse came in, was 5 years his junior, and the rest, as they say, is history, isn't it? Like I say, that first season we finished 12th, ended up pretty comfortable. And then over the next three seasons, which was 97-98, 98-99 and 99-2000, Hesse featured 151 times and scored 17 goals as we kept improving year on year. If you remember the last day of 97-98, we was at home to Wigan, who we'll talk about again a little later in the video, I'm sure. And we were the width of a post from getting into the playoffs, weren't we? Nicky Southall's cross-come shot smacking the inside of the upright on the final day. We missed out on goal difference, but I think it was a time that we really started to believe that we were a force in the third tier. We were competitive in the third tier. We could go toe-to-toe with the best that division had to offer, and we could ultimately challenge for promotion. 98-99 rolled around, and like I say, two players that I've already mentioned, Carlos Saba, Bob Taylor, were bought in for 1.1 million for the pair, and they scored 40 odd goals between them. As we improved on our 7th place from the previous campaign and finished 4th to put us in the playoffs, and Hesse played a huge part throughout that campaign. He scored 9 goals that season. Every single one of his strikes came in a victory for Gills. Most notable ones, favourite ones for myself, Bournemouth at home on Sky TV. I think it was the first time we'd been on Sky in the league, and we were pretty rubbish, to be frank, for an hour. Couldn't get in the game. Bournemouth had taken the lead. About an hour gone, Hesse, as I've already mentioned, grabs the game by the scruff of the neck, picks the ball up 30 yards from goal, gets it out of his feet, couple of touches, aims one, takes a big deflection, but the angle of the camera makes it look like an absolute screamer. There was absolute bedlam in the old Rainham end. Limbs, as the kids like to call it, scenes, people just going everywhere, bodies all over the place, people falling over railings because it was the old terracing, and played a huge part in that game that we eventually won in injury time, courtesy of Kevin Lisby's late winner. And yeah, one of my first really favourite memories of Andy Hessenthaler in a Gillingham shirt. And then if we fast forward to the spring, into them playoffs, we'd drawn 1-1 up at Preston. Another really big battle. You remember Hesse's battles all the time against Sean Gregan. Two players that you'd love to have in your team, but two players as opposition fans you probably hated. We didn't like Sean Gregan, thought he was a pain in the arse. I'm sure Preston fans thought that about Andy Hessenthaler, and plenty of other fans as well. Oh, excuse me. But yeah, the second leg back at Kent, after we'd drawn the first game 1-1. Lightning start. Hesse bangs one in after about a minute, and after that we managed the game really well. There was a few nervy moments towards the end. Obviously Preston were coming on strong, chucking everything, including the kitchen sink at us, but Hesse kept rallying the troops, kept marshalling his boys, and we saw it out, and we were off to Wembley for the first time in our history, where we were going to take on the mighty Manchester City, who had dropped into the third tier for the first time in their history, beset by financial problems. And obviously we all know what happened. Wembley heartache for Hesse, deserved so much better, having led 2-0 approaching injury time. We conceded twice, didn't we? Kevin Horlock and Paul Dickoff, and ultimately lost on penalties. It was, like I say, it was much less than Andy Hessenthaler was deserved. It was probably much less than we deserved for the campaign that we'd had. But that is football. We know the nature of the beast, and we had to pick ourselves up. We had to dust ourselves off. We had to deal with a change of manager. Tony Pulis was let go, we call it, in the summer of 1999 and replaced by former England under-21 manager Peter Taylor. He came in, he tweaked the squad a little bit, he brought in a few of his own players, but he kept the core of the side that Tony had built because he knew that they were good players, it was a good group, the team spirit was phenomenal, and it took us a while to get going, don't get me wrong, and there was a fair-sized hangover from that playoff final defeat, but we eventually got moving, and more pivotal goals from Hesse during the 1999-2000 campaign. One that sticks out, he scored the first goal of the post-Robert Taylor era. 27th of November 1999, I think was the exact date. We won 2-1 at Ninian Park. And again, Hesse's love for an early goal. I think it was about 30 seconds in we scored that day. Little flick over the keeper with the outside of his right foot, if I can remember correctly. And again, we fast forward to the spring. We fast forward to the playoffs. We were 3-1 down and chasing the game and staring into the abyss a little bit at Stoke's old ground. We were 3-1 down, and everyone knows what happened next. Andy Hessenthaler gets the ball on the left-hand touchline, drops his shoulder and runs inside, and Stoke are probably backing off and encouraging him to shoot because he's 30 yards from goal. My word, how did he catch it? Absolute rocket, absolutely dead straight as a die into the top corner. The away end went off. Fans jumping around their living room watching it on the telly back home. 3-2 defeat suddenly felt like a victory. And we were right back in the playoff, weren't we? And the second leg back in Kent again, there's a pattern here, was an attritional affair. Stoke's Icelandic manager and Icelandic players thought we were time wasting in the first leg, thought there was too much time added on. In the second leg, he was moaning because they had two people sent off, Graham Kavanagh and Colin Clark, I think it was. But they were still in the tie, Stoke. If you remember rightly, going into the final few minutes, they hit the post and we was only 1-0 up. So that would have chucked a spanner in the works, so to speak. But we eventually scored two more through Barry Ashby and Paul Smith, I think it was, to win 3-0. And lo and behold, we were back at the Twin Towers 12 months on from the Man City disaster to face Wigan Athletic, who've already been mentioned in this video. So yeah, 28th of May 2000, sodden pitch, heavy grey skies. Hessenthaler / Pat McGiven gave us the lead, didn't he? And then Simon Hayworth scored a very good equaliser to make it 1-1. Went into extra time. We was playing against 10 men and we were thinking, we've got this here. We've just got to be clever, got to manage the game properly. Barry Ashby gave away a soft penalty. Hesse kept believing. Hesse kept dragging his team forward. Hesse kept grabbing the game by the scruff of the neck. Hesse was never going to let us get beat, and played a huge part. Although I'm probably doing Peter Taylor a disservice because he made 2 massive substitutions, getting on Steve Butler, getting on Andy Thompson, and we all know what happened with them 2 when they were introduced. Hesse probably man of the match that day, probably between him and Junior Lewis for me. I thought both were absolutely phenomenal, absolutely run themselves to a standstill on a massive, heavy Wembley pitch. And it was brilliant retribution for the year before. For Hesse himself, as I say, Mr Gillingham through and through. People say if you cut him, he'd bleed blue. But for us fans as well, it was monumental because at 2-1 down, we're thinking, here we go again. Can we bring ourselves? Can we raise ourselves? Can we dig deep enough within to pull ourselves through and see ourselves over the line? And thank God we did. And it was a much better feeling than it had been 12 months ago, 12 months previously on the train home. And we were in the second tier for the first time in our history. We were going to be going to the places such as Blackburn and West Brom and Sheffield Wednesday and Nottingham Forest and all these other massive clubs. And it was new and it was exciting and it was fresh and it was a wonderful, wonderful time to be a Gillingham football fan. And I can only imagine how good it was to be playing in that side and skippering them on a week-to-week basis. But needless to say, Hesse stepped up a bit further that summer because Peter Taylor was lured away by Premier League Leicester City. So Hesse took over as player manager and brought in some good players, the likes of Paul Shaw and Chris Hope, Marlon King, as we embarked on our first challenge in the second tier of English football. And despite his playing appearances reducing somewhat, because if you look back, like I said, between 97, 98 to 99, 2000, he played 151 games in 3 seasons. Between 2000 and 2004, so 4 seasons, he only played 124 times, sorry. So by no means was he not playing at all, but he was obviously trying to juggle 2 roles. He was ably supported, I think, by, was it Richard Hill, our assistant at the time, now famous for being on the Sunderland Till I Die documentary and telling Stuart Donald that Will Grigg's not worth any more than 1 to 1.25 million. But Hesse has to take massive credit. He brought some good players in. We finished 13th, 12th and 11th in our first 3 seasons at that level, which are still our highest positions ever in our entire existence, and something that I don't think Hesse gets enough credit for. He was at the forefront of some big moments during that time. If you remember, Mark Viduka getting sent off for elbowing him in the face in a cup game at home to Leeds. There's the rugby tackles on fans. There's the rugby tackles on Andy Reid, which is a famous photo you can find on Google. And he's famous for being sent off or away from the dugout and the touchline as a manager and then bringing himself on as a player. Such was the way you could do it as you was a player manager. And it's something that's gone out of the game now, probably for the better, in all honesty. But back then it was still a thing, and Hesse done it wonderfully well. 2003-04 was a difficult season, we know that, and we only stayed up on the final day, courtesy of a 0-0 draw at Stoke and a wonderful, wonderful Steve Banks save. Hesse continued. People look back now and say maybe he should have resigned at the end of that season, but he decided to carry on. Such was his affinity and his love for the football club, and he eventually resigned in the autumn of 2004, and we were still struggling, but he was still registered as a player at 39 years of age, and he played a few times before spending the second half of that campaign at Hull City, who I think had been taken over by Peter Taylor by then, who was obviously good friends and knew Andy Hessenthaler really well. Into the next season, 2005-06, and unfortunately we dropped back into the 3rd tier after relegation on the final day of the 2004-05 campaign, this time at Nottingham Forest. Despite drawing 2-2, we were sent down by the finest of margins. So it was almost like we'd come full circle. He'd started with us in the 3rd tier and he was ultimately going to end with us in the 3rd tier. His final game came on the 10th of December 2005 in a 3-0 win at home to Port Vale, and he came on for the final 12 minutes of that fixture before departing in the January or the February for Barnet, who again I think were then managed by Peter Taylor. Is that, no, don't hold me to that. Peter Taylor's managed a lot of clubs, but yeah, and that was it for Hesse as the player. He'd been voted by the fans as the Gills' greatest ever player in 2005. He was again voted Gills' best player by the PFA in 2007, which is a huge achievement. Still holds the record as being the oldest player to ever feature for us in the league. And as I say, 14 years ago today, played his final game in a Gillingham shirt, which was his testimonial against the Hammers after a massive 360 club games in competitive fixtures and scoring 29 goals. Yeah, just really good to look back on Andy Hessenthaler, the player. We know he came back a couple of times as manager, as caretaker, as part of a gang of 4, as director of football. He even helped to employ Martin Allen, who won us a league title in 2012-13. So he's still claiming assists even when he wasn't directly involved with things. And I'm sure one day, dare I say it, in some capacity, Andy Hessenthaler will return to the football club and have a part to play, such as his links and his ties and his roots within the football club. Like I say, he is Mr Gillingham. For me, he's the best footballer to play for this football club, certainly in my lifetime by some distance. We've been lucky enough to have a lot of good players in my 25, 30 years watching the club. But captain, leader, legend, Mr Gillingham for me, Andy Hessenthaler. And it was just wonderful to see him at his absolute best in a Gillingham football shirt. Right. Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this trip down memory lane. Hopefully, come the end of the week, we might have some talk about new signings. Steve Evans has been on YouTube this evening saying that the boys will be back in for training next week, fingers crossed, and that we're very close on the signings front. So let's hope that this comes to fruition and we get some announcements in the next 48, 72 hours. But for now, keep staying safe, keep looking after each other. Please check out Fan Hub on Twitter and Facebook. They are developing an app to put football fans first and make sure that they are rewarded just for simply supporting their football club, which I think in these testing and trying times is even more important than ever before. A thumbnail will be at the end of this video, and if you can go and check them out, like I say, on Twitter and Facebook. But until next time, keep staying safe. We'll see you soon. Up the Gills.